It was the kind of quiet that doesn't feel normal. Too flat, too careful. I was in my kitchen rinsing out a mug, half watching some pointless video on my phone, when I realized I hadn't heard anything from their place in over an hour. No TV, no footsteps, no cabinet doors, just nothing. And then, through the wall, I caught this small sound. Not loud, more like somebody trying really hard not to make one. I stood there listening, not because I wanted details, but because I knew her. I'd known her long enough to recognize the difference between ordinary silence and the kind that comes after a bad night. A few seconds later, I heard a door shut next door. Then another. Then nothing again. When the knock came, it was so soft I almost missed it. I opened the door, and there she was in the hallway wearing jeans, a sweatshirt, and this look on her face like she was still holding herself together only because she hadn't decided it was safe to stop. Her eyes were red. Not dramatic. Not messy. Just tired in a way that made my chest tighten. "Can I stay here tonight?" she asked. That was it. No long speech. No explanation. Just that. "Yeah," I said right away, stepping back. "Of course. Come in." She walked past me fast, like she didn't want to be seen standing out there. I closed the door and locked it without thinking. When I turned around, she was already hugging her arms around herself in the middle of my living room, looking embarrassed for even being there. "You don't have to explain anything," I told her. She nodded once, but I could tell that only helped a little. I grabbed her a glass of water first, then changed it to tea because her hands were shaking and tea felt steadier somehow. She sat on the end of my couch holding the mug with both hands, staring at it like she needed something simple to focus on. I got her a blanket from the chair, even though my apartment wasn't cold, and put it beside her. She gave me this small look like she wanted to say thank you but didn't trust her voice. It hit me then how long it had been since I'd seen her relaxed. We'd still talked, still had our old shorthand, still did that thing where we could make each other laugh over almost nothing. But since moving in next door with him, she always seemed a little split. Like part of her was with me and part of her was listening for something else. "You can take the bed," I said. "I'll sleep out here." "No, I can just stay on the couch." "You're not staying on my couch." That got the smallest breath of a smile out of her. Barely there, but real. Later, after she'd had some tea and the color came back into her face a little, she finally started talking. Not all at once. In pieces. Like she had to test each sentence before letting go of the next one. She said it hadn't started bad. That was the first thing. At first he was just intense. Wanted to know where she was, who she was with, when she'd be home. Then it turned into comments. About what she wore. About which friends were a bad influence. About how I was too available, which was apparently suspicious. Then it became daily criticism dressed up like concern. The way she laughed. The way she spent money. The way she talked to people. The way she always somehow made him upset. I sat across from her and let her talk. "He keeps saying I make him act like this," she said quietly, still looking down into the mug. "Like if I was just easier, calmer, better, then everything would be fine." Something in me went cold hearing that. Tonight had been worse. He'd gone through her phone again. Asked why I'd texted her about picking up a package that got left by my door. Turned that into some whole thing. Accused her of hiding things. Started listing all the ways she'd changed since moving in. Then he blocked the front door when she tried to leave the room. She said that part very flat, which somehow made it worse. "He moved after a second," she said quickly. But that was the moment. I just looked at him and thought, I can't keep doing this. I didn't trust myself to speak right away. I was too angry, and she didn't need that from me. She needed calm. She needed one place tonight where nobody made her carry more. So I just said, "You did the right thing coming here." Her shoulders dropped a little when I said it. Just a little, but enough for me to see she'd been waiting for permission to believe that. After a while I stood up, took the mug from her, and told her I'd put clean sheets on the bed. When I came back, she was standing by the hallway, looking smaller than usual, but not lost anymore. Just worn out. "I only need one night," she said. "I just need one night where I feel safe." I met her eyes and said, "You have it." And for the first time since she stepped through my door, she looked like she believed me. I promised she'd be safe. Like and subscribe if you're rooting for her journey. Morning felt strange in the best and worst way. Nothing had happened in my apartment, and somehow that made everything feel heavier. The place was quiet except for the coffee maker and the soft sound of her moving around in my bedroom. I hadn't slept much on the couch. Not because it was uncomfortable. Mostly because every few minutes I'd found myself listening for noise in the hallway. Like I expected him to start pounding on my door. He didn't. When she came out, she looked cleaner, steadier, but still worn down. She tied her hair back with one of the bands she kept on her wrist, and she was wearing the same clothes from last night. For a second we just looked at each other like we both knew this was the part where real decisions started. "I'm sorry," she said, "for showing up like that." I was already pouring coffee into 2 mugs. "You don't need to apologize for coming here." She leaned against the counter and let out this tired breath. "I know. I hate that this is where things got." I handed her a mug. She wrapped both hands around it the same way she had around the tea last night, except this time she looked a little less like she might break. That alone made me feel protective in a way I was trying hard not to show too much. I made toast and eggs because standing around with coffee felt too serious. Food gave us something normal to do. She sat at my small kitchen table while I moved around, and for the first time in a long time it felt weirdly natural again. Like years ago, when we used to hang out without planning anything, when being around each other never needed explanation. Only now there was this other thing in the room with us. Not romance exactly. Not yet. Just awareness. She told me she had a cousin in another city. They weren't incredibly close, but close enough. Close enough that if she called and said she needed somewhere to land for a while, the answer would probably be yes. "I think I need to leave," she said. "Not forever. Just long enough to hear myself think again." I nodded right away. "Then that's what you do." She looked up at me like she'd expected hesitation. Or maybe a speech. "You really think so?" "Yes," I said. "You don't owe anyone a chance to keep wearing you down." That made her go quiet. Not upset. Just quiet in that way people get when a simple sentence hits harder than a long one. Over breakfast she told me more, and it came out clearer in daylight. How he'd slowly made everything feel like work. How every harmless thing became a discussion, then an argument, then somehow her fault. How she'd stopped calling certain people because he always had something to say about them. How she'd started changing small habits just to avoid his moods. She said the worst part wasn't even the tension. It was how normal it had started to feel. "I used to be louder," she said, staring down at her plate. "I used to say exactly what I thought. I used to walk into a room and not immediately check what kind of mood somebody was in." I sat across from her and had to grip my mug a little tighter. "You're still that person," I said. She gave me this look, half grateful, half unconvinced. "I don't know. Lately I've felt like a version of myself that's always apologizing." She was tired of always being the one to apologize. Have you ever felt like you were losing yourself in a relationship? Tell me in the comments. That one stayed with me. We started thinking through what she actually needed. A bag, her laptop, important papers, charger, a few clothes. Enough to get out clean without having to keep coming back for every little thing. She said she didn't want to go next door alone, and I told her she wouldn't. He wasn't there when we went in. That helped. Still, the second she stepped into that apartment, her whole posture changed. Smaller somehow. Careful. I stayed close without hovering while she packed a suitcase and a tote bag from the bedroom and desk. She moved fast, like she knew if she slowed down she might start second-guessing herself. At one point she froze with her hand on a drawer. "What?" I asked. She shook her head. "Nothing. I just can't believe I lived like this." I didn't know what to say to that, so I picked up the extra bag and asked if she had her documents. That seemed to help. Keeping it practical. One thing, then the next. Back in my apartment, she called her cousin from my balcony. I gave her privacy, but I could hear enough to know the answer was yes. Place to stay. No pressure. Come today if you want. When she came back inside, her eyes were wet again, but this time it looked different. More like relief than fear. She said I can come, she said. Good. I should go before I lose my nerve. So that became the plan. I drove her to the train station just after noon. Her suitcase was in my trunk, and neither of us had much to say for the first 10 minutes. The city looked annoyingly normal around us. People crossing streets, buying coffee, standing at bus stops. I remember thinking how strange it was that your whole life could tilt and the outside world would keep acting like any other Tuesday. At a red light, she turned toward me. You know what the worst part is? I glanced at her. What? That I felt safer knocking on your door at midnight than going back into my own apartment. I didn't answer right away because there wasn't a clean answer to that. I just looked ahead and said, "Then I'm glad you knocked." At the station, I carried her bag inside even though she said I didn't have to. We stood near the platform entrance with people moving around us. Announcements coming over the speakers, all this ordinary noise around a moment that didn't feel ordinary at all. She looked up at me, and all the tiredness from the last day was still there. But something else was there too. Something open. I forgot what it feels like, she said quietly. To be around someone and not brace myself. That hit me harder than anything else she'd said. I swallowed and kept my voice level. You never have to do that with me. For a second, neither of us moved. Then she stepped in and hugged me. It should have felt familiar. We'd hugged before plenty of times over the years. But this didn't feel casual. She held on tight, and I did too, one hand at the middle of her back, the other against her shoulder, and I had this sharp, impossible awareness that if I let myself think too much about what she meant to me, it was going to show all over my face. When she pulled back, she didn't go far. I don't know what I would have done last night if you weren't there, she said. I wanted to tell her I'd always be there, that I already had been, probably longer than was smart. Instead, I just said, "Text me when you get there." A tiny smile touched her mouth. You're not getting rid of me that easily. Then her train got called, and that was it. She took her bag, looked at me one more time, and walked through the gate. I stayed until she disappeared into the crowd. When I got back to my apartment, it was exactly the same as when I'd left it. Same couch, same mug in the sink, same folded blanket on the chair. But the quiet didn't feel peaceful anymore. Felt hollow. That was when it finally landed on me, fully and without anywhere to hide from it. My life had been built around staying calm, staying useful, staying out of trouble. I told myself that was enough. But standing there in that clean, quiet apartment, all I could think was that the only time it had felt truly right in months was when she was in it. And now that she was gone, I couldn't pretend not to know what that meant. The first couple of weeks after she left, my phone became the loudest thing in my apartment. Not constantly. She wasn't leaning on me every hour, and I wasn't trying to turn her into the center of every day. But there was this new rhythm between us that hadn't existed before. A message in the morning. A photo of the awful coffee at the place near her cousin's building. A late call when she couldn't sleep and wanted to hear a familiar voice that didn't make her tense up. At first, she still sounded careful. Like every sentence had to pass through some filter before it reached me. Then, little by little, that started changing. One night she called while I was folding laundry, and I realized halfway through the conversation she was actually laughing. Not the polite version I'd gotten used to hearing from next door. Her real laugh. The one that always came out a little too fast when something genuinely caught her off guard. I stopped folding the same t-shirt for about 10 seconds just to listen to it. "What?" she asked. "Nothing," I said. "You just sound more like yourself." There was a pause on the line. Not awkward, just quiet. "I think I do too," she said. She started building a routine there, helping her cousin around the house at first, then picking up remote work again, then meeting with someone to talk through everything that had happened and why she'd stayed as long as she did. She didn't dump all of it on me, and I respected that. But she told me enough that I could hear the shift. She wasn't just trying to get through the day anymore. She was starting to look at her own life like it still belonged to her. Meanwhile, back at the building, I still had to walk past her old door every day. A week after she left, I ran into him in the hallway. He was leaning against the wall near the mailboxes, acting casual in that way some guys do when they're very obviously not casual at all. When he saw me, his face changed just slightly. Not surprise. more like irritation. You heard from her? He asked. I kept my keys in my hand and didn't stop walking. That's between you and her. He gave this short laugh that had no humor in it. Right? Because I'm sure you're just being a great neighbor. That landed exactly how he meant it to, but I wasn't giving him anything. I turned and looked at him. She left, I said. Maybe spend some time thinking about why. His jaw tightened. For a second I thought he was going to keep going. But he didn't. He just stared at me with that same ugly little need to make everything into some kind of contest. I walked away before he could try again. That night I told her I'd seen him. I kept it simple and she went quiet for a few seconds. Did he say anything weird? She asked. Nothing important. She knew I was editing. Still, I sat on my couch and looked out at the dark window. He wanted to know if I'd heard from you. I told him that wasn't his business. Another pause. Thank you, she said softly. A month later she came back for the first time. Not to stay. Just to clear out the rest of her things and finally shut that door all the way. She texted me 2 days before and asked if I could be there. Not go in and do it for her. Just be there. I said yes before she finished the sentence. When I picked her up from the station, the first thing I noticed was that she looked lighter. Not magically fixed. Not untouched. Just steadier. Her shoulders weren't folded in on themselves anymore. She got into my car, smiled at me, and for a second it felt almost normal until I saw the way her fingers tightened around the strap of her bag. You okay? I asked. She nodded. I will be. That mattered. Not I hope so. Not maybe. I will be. We went to the apartment in the afternoon. She had already arranged for him not to be there, but some people like that still think arrangements are optional. So I wasn't exactly relaxed when we walked upstairs. She opened the door herself. That was the moment that told me how much she'd changed. The first night she came to me, she'd crossed my doorway like somebody asking permission to exist. This time she stood in her own old apartment, looked around once and said, "Let's get this done." We packed boxes from the bedroom, bathroom, kitchen, all the ordinary pieces of a life that had gone bad slowly. Books, sweaters, framed photos she didn't even want but refused to leave behind. Halfway through, he showed up. I heard his voice in the hallway before I saw him. So this is what we're doing? He stepped into the doorway and looked from her to me like he was trying to pull the whole old dynamic back into place. Like one tense stare could put her right back where she'd been. It didn't work. She turned toward him, box in her arms, and her voice came out calm. You don't get to do this anymore. He ignored that and looked at me. You really think this is your business? Before I could answer, she cut in. It became his business the night I had to leave my own home to feel calm, she said. And this is over. So move. The whole room changed after that. I felt it. He did too. Because she wasn't looking at me to speak for her. She wasn't waiting for rescue. She was standing there, tired but solid, choosing herself right in front of him. After a few more pointless lines from him that went nowhere, he stepped aside. Maybe because I was there. Maybe because for once he could tell intimidation wasn't landing. Probably both. We got the last boxes out and loaded my car in silence. When I shut the trunk, she let out one long breath and leaned back against it. The sun was low, the parking lot half empty, and for a second neither of us said anything. Then she looked at me. I need to tell you something. There was no panic in her face. Just honesty. What I feel for you is real, she said. I know that now. Every part of me went still. But I can't start something with you just because you were the safe place when everything else fell apart. Her eyes held mine the whole time. I need to know that when I come to you, it's because I'm choosing you clearly, not because I'm scared, or lonely, or grateful. I understood that immediately, maybe because it was exactly why I hadn't said anything first. So I nodded and said, then we do it right. Her expression changed, just slightly. Relief, maybe surprise too. You mean that? Yeah, I said. I'm not interested in getting the wrong version of this. She looked down for a second, then back at me. I don't know how long it'll take. I know. And you'd still wait? I stepped a little closer, close enough that my voice didn't have to travel far. For you to come back because you want a future with me? I said. Yeah, I'd wait. Her eyes went bright, and then she smiled in that small, real way she had when something mattered too much to joke about. We got back in the car after that, and nothing between us was settled. Exactly. But it was clear, and somehow clear felt even better. Time did what nothing else could do. It made everything less blurry. Not fast. Not in some neat, dramatic way. Just slowly. Week by week. Call by call. One normal day after another. She stayed where she was for a few more months, and we kept talking. Sometimes every day, sometimes just enough to stay inside each other's lives without forcing it. The difference now was that neither of us pretended it was ordinary. We never turned it into some big speech, but it was there in the way we listened longer, in the way she told me about the smallest parts of her day, in the way I started telling her things I usually kept to myself. She told me when she finally stopped checking her phone with that old tight feeling in her stomach. I told her when I changed jobs inside the company instead of staying in the same safe role just because it was easy. She sent me photos from walks, from bookstores, from her cousin's kitchen when she tried making dinner and got half of it wrong. I sent her proof that I'd finally bought real chairs for my dining table instead of pretending two mismatched ones were fine for a grown man pushing 30. Look at you, she said on one video call, smiling at the screen. Building a real life. I leaned back in my chair. Pretty sure I always had a life. She tilted her head. You had routines. That one stayed with me. She was right. For years I'd lived like being decent and dependable was the same thing as being fully awake. But after she left and after everything that came after, I stopped hiding inside predictability. I started saying yes more, seeing people more, making plans further than 1 week ahead. It wasn't that she changed me into someone else. It was more that knowing what mattered made it harder to keep living halfway. By the time winter turned and the air got softer again, she sounded like herself almost all the time. Not the old version exactly. Stronger than that. Clearer. She laughed more easily. She spoke more directly. And when she was upset, she didn't shrink around it. She just said what was true and let it be true. Then one Thursday afternoon she texted me. I'll be in your city next weekend. I looked at the message for a full 10 seconds before answering. Work thing? I wrote. No, she sent back. You. That was all. The whole week after that felt strange. Not nervous in a bad way. More like my life had been leaning toward one point for so long that now I could finally see it. I met her Saturday evening outside a small restaurant 3 streets over from my apartment. Nothing fancy. Just warm light in the windows, good food, and the kind of place where people stayed a little longer than they planned. She was standing near the door when I got there, one hand in her coat pocket, hair loose, watching people pass like she was giving herself one last quiet second before turning toward me. When she did, the look on her face made everything else drop away. We hugged first. Of course we did. But even that felt different now. Not uncertain. Not borrowed from friendship. Just true. Inside, over dinner, we talked easily at first. Travel. Work. Her cousin. My apartment building. Small things. Familiar ground. But under all of it was the reason she was there, and we both knew it. After we ate, we walked without deciding where to go. The city felt calm. The sidewalks still a little damp from rain earlier in the day. We ended up near the park a few blocks from my place. The same park we used to cut through years ago when we were younger and everything in life felt less defined. She stopped near a bench but didn't sit. I wanted to do this in person, she said. I nodded once. Okay. She looked at me steadily. No fear in it. No hesitation. Just care. I didn't come back because I needed somewhere to land, she said. I didn't come back because you were good to me when things were bad. I came back because I love the person I am around you. And because I love you. There it was. Simple. Clean. No rush in it. No confusion. Something in my chest that had been held tight for months finally let go. I stepped closer. I've been ready for a while, I told her. But I'm glad you waited until you knew. She smiled then, and that old warmth I'd known for years was there. Only now it had nothing in the way. So am I, she said. I kissed her after that. Not like a dramatic movie scene. No audience. No big moment forced bigger than it was. It felt exactly the way it should have felt after everything. Calm, certain, overdue in the best possible way. Her hand came up to my face, and when we pulled back, she laughed softly under her breath like she couldn't quite believe we'd finally stopped standing still. Later, back at my apartment, we didn't rush anything. We sat on the couch with tea going cold on the table, talking in that quiet way people do when the hard part is over and the truth is finally allowed to be easy. At some point, she looked around the room and smiled. "This place feels different now," she said. "It is. Because I'm here?" I shook my head. "Because this time you're here because you want to be." She held my gaze for a second, then moved closer and rested against me like there was nowhere else she needed to prove she could stand. That night, when we finally went to bed, she reached for my hand in the dark and said, very quietly, "I didn't come for one safe night.